Greetings, everybody, again. Once again, we engage our canonical texts in our course in Ishvara, and we begin the Vedanta Sutras. So we had a little bit of a glimpse at the Upanishads. We had a sense that, they're not systematic. We've made several references to Shankara, the 8th to 9th century theologian, and Vedantin. Before I finish that sentence, let me just say, so Vedanta is another word for the Upanishads, because literally Vedanta is made of two words, Veda Anta, which means the end of the Vedas. And we mentioned, I think, in our introductory session, that the Vedas are the oldest strata of the Vedic corpus, but that corpus has 4 stratas. And they are the Brahmanas that we didn't say very much about, but they're just prose ritualistic texts, and they tell us how to perform the ritual. The Vedas are the hymns that are recited during the ritual, beautiful, set to beautiful sort of melodic, 3-pitched kind of harmonies, melodies that are especially visible in the Samaveda, one of the 4 Vedas. And then we have the Brahmanas, ritualistic texts. We have the Aranyakas. We didn't really say much about them, but we did encounter the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad. So there you see that the Aranyakas have material that overlaps with the Upanishads. The 4th strata, the Upanishads, that's what we've been reading in this course. That's the 4th strata. So Vedas, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, Upanishads. And we didn't say much about the Aranyakas. So they don't have much of a defining quality of their own. They have sort of Brahmana type ritualistic material, and they have Upanishad type. And we saw from the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, even these boundaries are flexible, because the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad is sort of its own title, situates itself as sort of an Aranyaka as well as an Upanishad. In any event, we saw that in some places we had monistic verses. Remember that the Atman is one completely and utterly. It appears to be separated because of ignorance. But once it becomes enlightenment, like the river, seems to be a river. The Ganga seems to be a distinct entity, but what happens to the Ganga when it reaches the ocean? It becomes one with the ocean. It's not that it disappears. It's not that it ceases to be, but it ceases to be an individual entity. And whatever waters it had in it become one with the greater ocean. So we saw these, what we've been calling monistic, but in Sanskrit, we'll use the word advaita. There's no real difference. There's no dvaita. There's no duality between a river and an ocean. There's just a temporarily apparent reality, but the minute it reaches its true destination, the ocean, it's no longer an individual. So Shankara takes that view. And he takes the view even further, more extreme view, that not only is the Atman not an individual, but that the world is unreal. That's a very extreme view. Because then you have to explain, well, why does it appear real? So you say, well, it's Maya, illusion, but then the next question is, well, what is this illusion? Is illusion real? Is there a real illusion? In which case now you have 2 entities, Brahman and illusion. But let's hold on that, because Ramanuja is going to critique that very severely. And then we saw a century later, Ramanuja, great theologian, he says, okay, everything is Advaita. It's sort of one because everything is God, Brahman. But within the oneness, there's difference. So his school is called Vishishta Advaita. 2 words, Vishishta Advaita. I know we've touched upon this before, but I did say we'd be, revisiting and repeating it. There's differences in the oneness. And what are the differences? A real world, a real soul. So it may seem that the river merges in the sea, but really it doesn't. Its subatomic particles remain subatomic. Perhaps, I don't know, he wouldn't have said that, but he would have said in the ocean there's differences, a whole variety, there's a whole world of fish and seaweed and all kinds of entities. It looks one from the outside superficially, but really it's a highly variegated environment. So for Ramanuja, 3 real things. Brahman, and not only is Brahman, but Brahman in its causal nature. So I'll continue that in a second. I'm sorry I keep saying that, but I want to make sure that we have all the bits in place so we understand this properly, because we're going to be reading now Shankara and Ramanuja. So Ramanuja will say, world is real, eternally real. Now, it may be temporary, and things dissolve. Okay, Even physicists will say, plants dissolve at some point back into their atomic substructures, subatomic, and ultimately it's real. It's ultimately particles and forces or whatever they end up discovering, strings or however far science keeps going, reducing things to finer causal entities. It's real. And the souls are real. I'm not you, you're not me. Our consciousness are eternally distinct. It's not that we will merge. We may become one with Brahman for Ramanuja in a different way. Different way. What way? Well, what I was going to say before was, Brahman is not just the support and cause, sustainer of everything. Everything dissolves into Brahman's powers and Shaktis, but Brahman is ultimately personal. Shankara, no. Brahman is impersonal, on all personality and notions of creation and Ishwaras. They're conventionally real. In the mirage, things seem to be real. In the mirage, it seems like there's water and an oasis. So we can talk about what's in the mirage. And we can say, as long as we understand it's a mirage, well, okay, it's water and there's trees and there's palm trees. It's not an airport, right? So we can say there are things that are real, that appear to be there, even if they're ultimately false. So we can actually have a conversation, a coherent, rational conversation about discussing what is the nature of what appears to be real in a mirage. And certain things appear to be in the mirage and other things are not. So some things are totally and utterly unreal. But in the mirage, there is apparent reality. These are important points for Shankara. So there seems to be a creation, there seems to be a world, and if there's a creation, there must be an Ishvara. So for Shankara, there is an Ishvara, only conventionally. But he accepts the logic. If there is a creation, then there must be a creator. That part of the equation he accepts. But then he goes further and says, but actually the whole idea of creation and creator, both of them are ultimately illusory. But were there to be a creation in the world of mirage and illusion, then it's logical to say it must have a creator. So in that way, he's kind of an interesting sort of theist. He accepts the arguments of theism, but only within conventional illusory reality. But nonetheless, he'll debate Buddhists, he'll debate the non-theists, as we're going to see, very vigorously. So after all, we're trapped in this conventional world. It seems like this test, I'm sitting at a table looking at TV screen, and there's my house to this side and trees behind me. So, and we have to function in this conventional world until we become enlightened. So therefore we have to sort of navigate this world, and, we have to eat and we have to go to the stores and that sort of thing. Shankara's not going to deny that. So within conventional reality, as a philosopher, he's going to say, well, to the extent that this conventional reality creation is real, yes, of course there must be an Ishvara. Things didn't. And we'll see him arguing against those who reject an Ishvara. But he's only doing that with the confines of lower level reality. Okay? So, but how are these two philosophers coming up with completely different, Ramanuja, God is real, creation is real, nothing to do with conventional, non-conventional. It's ultimately, finally, absolutely real from any point of view. How do they come up to these different positions? They're both reading the same Upanishads. So we see the Upanishads allow both interpretations. There are some verses that favors monism, like the Chandogya rivers, the bee taking the nectar, it all merges into honey. Others seem to think about a personal being. It thought, let me create it. It became many. No talk of it's not nowhere in the Upanishads, by the way, does it say the world is an illusion, it's unreal. So Shankara has to work pretty hard, to make that case, and he does. He's a brilliant philosopher. Okay. So because the Upanishads are unsystematic and allow many possible readings, because they weren't meant to be philosophical texts. Most people read them as sort of, mystical texts that are encouraging us to seek Brahman. They're not setting out to really rigorously and systematically establish the nature of Brahman, the nature of the world. Later metaphysicians do that. They're just establishing, okay, there's Brahman and you should seek it, and that's the goal of life. That's the concern of the Upanishads. But then, later on, a need is felt. Challenge of Buddhism. Buddhists are coming along saying there's no Atman, or at least there's no eternal Atman. There may be momentary sequencing of consciousness interdependent with its objects. But there's no eternal Atman that can abide in its own nature, as Vedanta says and the Upanishads say. So there's challenges from without, and so many different views with from within. So, that's what an intellectual does. He sets out, okay, let's clarify this. So along comes Badarayana, an ancient sage, somewhere, I think it's 3rd, 4th century, and he writes the Vedanta Sutra to clarify the Upanishads, and he sets out to establish that whatever the Upanishads may be talking about, sometimes they say everything comes from prana, life, air. Sometimes they say this creation comes from ether. Well, that seems to contradict with other statements. It says it all comes from Brahman. So why does it say it all comes from ether here? Over there in some other passage, it comes from prana, the life air, and various things like that. Various references to the golden person in the sun. Well, who the heck is that? So Badarayana comes along and he wants to say, okay, sometimes the Upanishads speak metaphorically, sometimes that's one of his main arguments, and we have to read things metaphorically. And in this way, he writes the Vedanta Sutra, 750 or 700, I can't remember, verses, maybe 700. Or is it 400? Gosh, I beg your pardon, I can't remember. Oh, no, it's 550, but don't write that down. I won't put it on the quiz because I can't even remember. I think it's 550. But you can Google it. Along comes Badarayana, and he sets out to systematize it. He does. He kind of his exposition is systematic in a sense, but the problem is the sutras are so succinct and curt. You don't know. He doesn't even. He's talking about a verse in the Upanishads. He doesn't tell you which one it is. There may be one word in his sutra that is connecting to, to a word in the Upanishads, and you're supposed to know that one word is referring to that verse in the Upanishad, but that same word may occur in other verses in the Upanishad. So we cannot not read the Vedanta without the commentaries. It wasn't meant to be read without commentaries. It was meant to be sort of like a series of bullet points. If you give a paper at a conference, you have to, you don't want to read your whole paper. It's so boring. People just stand on the podium and read a paper. So they might write down 20 bullet points, which serves to trigger the memory. So if you're giving a paper on the Upanishad or the Vedanta, you might write, okay, Upanishads, and then that trigger, okay, let's first talk about the Upanishads. Shankara, and then that just Shankara, and then you talk about Shankara, Ramanuja. So you write 20 bullet points. Well, that's what the sutras are like. So the sutras don't really help. It's a different kind of problem that the Upanishads have. The Upanishads are not systematic. They allow different, we've read them. We read them 2,000, 2,500 years later in the West. We could sort of read the passages, but one passage seems to conflict with another about whether it's God is personal or impersonal. Is the soul one with Brahman or distinct? Is Brahman a thinking personal being or not? Different passages say different things. So that's the challenge of the Upanishads. So the Vedanta, does systematize things, but they're so succinct, you can't read them without commentaries. So they're incomprehensible, actually, without commentarial assistance, because they were meant to be used to be unpacked. If you picked up somebody's bullet points after the conference, someone leaves that bullet point on the table, and then somebody comes to clean up after the conference, picks up the bullet points, 20, they wouldn't have a clue what the talk was about. Those bullet points are meant to be unpacked. So that's what the sutra is like. So that creates a second type of problem. So then the commentators come along and say, okay, we're going to, systematize the Upanishads by following Badarayana, who writes the Vedanta Sutra. Okay, he did a good job, but we need to just sort of embellish and elaborate what he's written. Sounds good. What's the problem now? Well, different commentators come out with completely different understandings of what the sutras are saying. And we're just using Shankara and Ramanuja as our two examples, okay? So that's the background story. Now Ramanuja, okay, so let's bring him up. We'll start reading. I don't want to okay, here we are. Notice that we are on we're just on the first sutra, 111 up here. We're on page 81. This is topic 1. Where's the other 80 pages? 80 pages he spends in refuting Shankara's non-dual Advaita philosophy. 80 pages he sets out to show how incoherent the idea. To say, for Ramanuja, that the world is false and individuality of the Atman is illusory. Well, then what's illusion then? To give you one of his examples. Is illusion in Brahman? That's contradictory. That's like saying there's darkness in the sun. You can't have darkness in the sun. The sun, by definition, is a luminous body. To say the unluminous, luminous, that's just incoherent, contradictory. So you can't say illusions in Brahman. Is it separate from Brahman? Well, Shankara can't accept that because he's non-dual. You can't have Brahman and illusion like two entities and one sort of covers the other, because then you've created dualism. So the only other option is to say, well, maybe illusion is a part of Brahman. It covers part of Brahman, that's me and you in this world, and then God remains uncovered. But now you've created a dualism in Brahman. You can't have a dualism outside of Brahman, but you can't have a dualism inside of Brahman if you're a Shankara philosopher, a follower, or if you come in the line of Shankara, because it's radical, hardcore Advaita. No, dual. It's the same word, dvai. Dvaita, dual, comes from Indo-European, Latin, and Sanskrit, are cognate languages, cousin languages. So that's one of the arguments Ramanuja raises, and it's a problem, actually. And many others. Ramanuja would say, well, if everything's an illusion, so are you and I. So scripture's an illusion then. So how do you know about Brahman? How can you know about Brahman? Shankara will accept, as we'll see in a couple of sutras further on, only through scripture can you know about Brahman. So Ramanuja will say, well, the scripture is illusion according to you. Words are illusion. Words deal with subject, object, pronouns, I, you, me, they, he, them, action, verbs, objects. If everything is illusion, you can't have language. And if you can't have language, you can't have knowledge. And if you can't have knowledge in scriptural form or taught form, then how do you know about Brahman? There's no way of knowing it. You can't perceive it anyway. Your eyes are illusion. You can't make an inference because inference is based on perception. You can't hear about it or learn about it, which is the Vedantic way, as we'll find out. Because words are illusion, your ears are illusion. So how do you know about it? And Shankara would have he'd say something like, well, okay, fair enough. But when you're in an illusion, when you're in the mirage, you can navigate, or if you're in a mental home and someone tells you, oh, I'm Jesus Christ, there's no point saying, oh, no, you're not. You have to say, oh, okay, Jesus, well, that's nice, you're Jesus. You have to work within that person's paradigm and say something like, well, if you're Jesus, how about you turn this water into wine? And try to work with a person from within that paradigm. So Shankara will have his responses. Ramanuja spends 80 pages. That's a fifth of his entire exposition. On more than a fifth, refuting Shankara. We're not going to do all of that. That's a course unto itself. But let's start off. So we're actually 111 starts 80 pages ago, but he's not following the sutra in 111. The first sutra is a Tato Brahma Jignasa. Now let us inquire. Now let there be inquiry into Brahman. Jignasa, desiderative noun. Now there is the desire to know Brahman. That's the first sutra. Atta, ato, ataha becomes atato. It's atta, atas. Now, therefore. So then there's a big discussion. What does this mean now? Now as opposed to when, and therefore, right? So there's a big discussion we're not going to get into. What is it now? And some argue, well, now you've done your rituals, now you've done all your ritualistic Vedic stuff, you got frustrated with it, you've got all your temporary gains that you get from ritualism and you're still unfulfilled. Now you can inquire into something deeper. So that's one way of interpreting now. Another way it might be, now you have a human form. You can inquire into Brahman. Animals can't, they're trapped in karma. They can't sit down and philosophize and theorize and study scripture, sacred texts, and listen to teachers. So that might be another way of thinking now. Now we have the human form. And this way, but we don't have enough time to do all of that. So let's just kick off. So he takes the view that the now is after an inquiry into the ritualistic portion of the Vedas. Ramanuja's view is that now in the first sutra, I'm sorry, the first sutra isn't here, it's 80 pages earlier. So I didn't want to put 80 pages we weren't going to read. I didn't want to put it up there. It would have cluttered up our text, but it's just 4 words. Atta, ato, ataha, atta, ataha, Brahma, jignasa. Now, therefore, Brahman, a desire to inquire. put that into English syntax. We have to flip it around a bit and say, now there is a desire to know Brahman. In other words, this text is for those who desire to know Brahman. You still want to do your rituals, go read the other text, the earlier Vedas. So Ramanuja starts off. So after, that's why now comes after what? After an inquiry into the ritualistic portion of the Vedas. What happens if you do a bunch of rituals? Well, one comes to know that results acquired by mere sacrifices are ephemeral. You do enough rituals. He's not saying they don't work. No one says that. You do your rituals to the celestial beings, you'll get whatever it is you want. Progeny, that's never questioned. You do it correctly. If it doesn't work, you've made a mistake. It's accepted for 2,000 years. 3,000 years. The efficacy of the ritual. 2,500 years, we could say. But what can you realize? Not that they don't work, but in fact, it's assumed they do work, and you get the things that you hope to get from the ritual, and you get them, and then what? You're still dissatisfied. They didn't make you happy in the way you thought they would. So after an inquiry into the ritualistic portion of Vedas, after that, one comes to know what? That results acquired by mere sacrifices, rituals, are ephemeral, temporary. On the contrary, right? What's Vedanta got to offer? That's what the Vedas and the Brahmanas and the earlier texts have to offer. What do we have to offer in Vedanta? On the contrary, the results of the knowledge of Brahman, which is the concern of Vedanta, is eternal. If you get Brahman, you get something eternal. You realize your eternal nature, you're eternally liberated. As such, an inquiry into Brahman should be taken up. Well, if someone offers you something that's temporary and doesn't really satisfy, or something and that's eternal and blissful from the point of view of Vedanta, what would an intelligent person, a person who's actually sane, what would they choose? Now, in all commentarial exposition, we have the Purva Paksha, the opposing point of view. He just calls it objection here. If you want to know the Sanskrit, it's Purva Paksha, P-U-R-V-A, Paksha, P-A-K-S-A. If you're interested in Indian philosophy, you need to learn that word. It's not going to be in the quiz, but it's important. I may use it. Purva Paksha. It's literally the side of the other, or the point of view of the other. And so the text presents, makes it very intellectually, they're not dogmatic. They're not just trapped in a box in their own little world, doing their own little thing, and they're not really interested in what other people are saying. They're always engaging in the intellectual environment. To this day, if Vedanta is going to be established in the West, it needs to engage modern physics, modern psychology, modern philosophy of religion, modern philosophy, psychology. And that's slowly happening. So some of you, maybe, some of my students from previous years have gone on to get PhDs in Indian philosophy or engage psychology, and they are bringing in Indian points of view. And then they bring them in dialogue with modern Western points of view. Indians have done that for 2,500 years. They've engaged the materialists, the Buddhists, so many things that sprung up outside of the Vedic tradition. The Vedic, it's not that they close their doors and say, oh, we don't want to talk to them. They engage them, and they even introduce the other points of views in their own commentaries. And in fact, it starts off. Every commentary starts off with the opposing point of view. So here it's called objection. Right, now, what's the objection? There's no need to know Brahman. And these are the Mimamsakas. We're going to have one paper on the Mimamsakas. They don't accept Ishvara. They're atheists. Well, so remember the word. Mimamsaka is also a desiderative noun. Also means those who desire to know. Those who desire to think, man. But they're the ritualists. They're the ones that want to keep the old Vedic ritual going. Just because that's what keeps the universe revolving and existing. You have the daily performance of ritual keeps the sun rising. It keeps man and woman and humanity in the state of well-being, and perpetuates the rain and all the things necessary for well-being and happiness. And in the next life, you go to a celestial realm, not liberation. So early Mimamsas did not even believe in liberation. Later on, they added, later Mimamsas did. By that time, the notion of liberation had pervaded all the intellectual traditions, almost all of them. So the Mimamsakas, they don't like this because look what Ramanuja says about the ritual. It doesn't say it doesn't work. He says it's temporary. Well, the Mimamsakas don't like this. For them, you have to do your ritual. It's enjoined in the sacred text. So there's their objection. There's no need to know Brahman, says the objector, the Mimamsaka, the knowledge of which is attained after great effort. You have to go and meditate in the forest for 50 years. But the result of such knowledge is the attainment of immortality. What are you going to get from all this hard, intense meditation and study? You get immortality. The Mimamsaka objects, this particular objector accepts that. But he says we can also get that by rituals, as is declared by text. And remember, they're Vedanta, so they're interpreting the Shastra, so what the scripture. So what you're going to get in Vedanta is a lot of references to the ancient texts. You won't get that in the later schools, like the logicians. They never quote sacred texts. They just use logic. Vedanta, by definition, what it does, what it is, its raison d'être, its reason for existing, is to clarify the scripture. It's going to be full of references to the scripture. So argumentation, at least with the Mimamsakas, is based on quoting scripture. Mimamsaka quotes this scripture, you want to refute it, you quote some other scripture. You can't do that with a Buddhist, because Buddhists don't accept your scripture. No point quoting a scripture to someone who doesn't accept your scripture, or scripture in general. But you can do that with people that do accept the scripture. You can engage in that kind of an exchange. So the Mimamsaka do accept scripture. Eternal, they accept they're eternal and perfect. But he says you don't need to know Brahman, because we can get this immortality by rituals. And then they quote the text, as is declared by text, like drinking soma juice, we have become immortal. He doesn't give the reference, but it'd be somewhere in some Veda. The soma is a kind of beverage, no one quite knows what it was, that was offered to the celestials. It was intoxicating. So you can imagine there's lots of theories about what kind of an intoxication it was. Now you get the answer. So the objection is raised, and answer, right? Keep this in mind, because it's going to the entire Vedanta is going to be like this: objector, objection, and answer. So the answer is, look, these ritual results of work are ephemeral. It can never give permanent results. Your rituals, fair enough, they give you results, but not permanent. And so it cannot help us attain immortality. You might be able to go to a celestial realm for a very, very, very long time, but not immortality. Soon you come back down and you get embodied again, and you have to suffer the problems of birth and death and old age and disease, the four things: janam, mrityu, jara, vyadhi. Birth, janam, mrityu, death, jara, old age, vyadhi, illness. So what's the point? You get a temporary vacation, temporary relief. Sense of an intelligent person is thinking long term, not just immediate. It's a sign, the difference between a wise person and a fool. And then Ramanuja then quotes different texts to make his point that these results from the ritual are temporary. He says texts like, having examined the world attainable through works means rituals, a Brahmana should get dispassionate towards them. You examine it. What are these worlds like? Okay, I do my ritual. Okay, I get some rain and I live a happy life. Then I have to die. So then what happens? Well, I go to the celestial world. You examine it. What's the celestial realm? Well, wait, it's lovely up there. Weather is perfect all the time. Bodies are never, really rare, don't get sick. Everyone is gorgeous and beautiful. The level of pleasure is far more heightened than anything we can experience with our gross bodies. They have subtle bodies, but you keep examining and you notice, wait a minute, but it comes to an end. Keep examining it. Don't just sort of stop by saying, oh, nice bodies, perfect weather. Okay, I'll sign the contract. Read the whole contract. And you come to a point, and you come to a phrase where we'll say, by the way, even the celestial realms are temporary. As Krishna says in the Gita, Abrahma bhuvana loka punaravartano juna. From the highest realm of Brahma, the celestial with the four heads, they're all places of birth and death. Brahma is not Brahman. I don't know if I've discussed that, but let's not take a detour now. Brahma with a long A is a celestial. Brahman, neuter noun with an N, is what we've been talking about all along in the Upanishads, the absolute truth. Okay. So he quotes other texts which counter the Mimamsa text. Having examined the worlds, a Brahmin should get dispassionate. The uncaused cannot be had through the cause. You can't get the eternal through temporary acts of ritual. That which is uncaused, Brahman, cannot be attained by what you're causing. You make it when you have a ritual. You're initiating a cause to produce an effect, right? The ritual is the cause, and the effect you want is whatever you want from the ritual. You want to make it to the celestial realm, but the uncaused cannot be attained by the cause. A cause is a temporary thing, which can only create a temporary effect. And then he goes on. On the other hand, and we read this Mundaka, you can go check the verse. You've got the Mundaka. MU is Mundaka. 1, 2, 12. You know how to read that. CHA is the Chandogya. I'm not sure if I gave you this passage, but you can check his references. And of course, the translation, the English may be slightly different from the version that we had, different translator. Okay, so these in brackets here is Taittiriya down here. Taittiriya 2:1. You figure it out. Shve, what do you think that is? How about Shvetashvatara with Rudra and Hari? So you can check this out if you like. And that's what a Vedantin likes to do. Likes to, it's just like what some people like to watch TV, watch nonsense and rubbish and soap operas and illusory, non-true, non-real things. Someone seeking knowledge wants to read this, things that talk about truth and eternality. So you might want to follow these up. There's 100 of you in this course, 120, I don't know. Maybe 1 or 2 of you want to pursue this. So in which case you can chase this down. I'd like to think in every class, there is at least some of you that really take to this. Or any teacher likes to think like that. Because we want to keep the teachings alive and keep them transmitted through the generations. And we have had Rutgers students become professors of Indian philosophy. Don't think, this can't be done. And there's a very good moment now because, now with our sort of political correctness and our kind of culturally sensitive moments in our society, it's very, it makes sense for people, maybe South Asian students to be representing South Asian religion. We can't go with that too far, of course, because then that becomes another kind of racism and ism. And the Vedanta yoga wouldn't support that. They would say your body has got nothing to do with your level of wisdom. The Atman has got nothing to do with the body that it's in. So it's not like a Hindu body has somehow any more right to Indian knowledge. It's like, a Christian, right? Christ came from Palestinian, but you don't have to have a Palestinian body to be a Christian. That's nonsense, because the whole teaching of Christ is that we're all souls and we're all whatever we are. We're all servants of God. Well, the same thing in Hinduism. We're all Atman. So whether you're a Hindu body or not, that's to think I'm a Hindu is right there is illusion. But nonetheless, it's a good moment if you're interested, whether you have a South Asian body or an American or a non-South Asian body. It doesn't matter. If you do your work and you can pursue a career in academia. There's nothing stopping you. We have a number of students that have been successful in that, and then a number that are getting PhDs right now. And our TA from last semester, the Patel twins, they just got fully funded. MA, they applied to 3 places and got full funding in all 3. They got to choose. They were so good. They were such outstanding students. And they chose to get an MA first and then get a PhD just because it improves your chances. They'll get in anywhere they want. They're so dedicated. And they'll get their PhDs and become professors. If that is something that appeals to you, don't think it can't be done. It can. So on the other hand, we may spend 2 sessions on this. Okay, I've kept 2 whole weeks empty at the end of the semester precisely because if we need to spill over, let's spill over, my friends. Let's not confine ourselves artificially. We write a syllabus because we have to have some kind of structure, but the whole purpose of those extra 2 weeks is we need to spill over, we'll spill over. This is the traditional way of teaching. You just let the text guide the direction of the flow of the transmission of the engagement with this knowledge. So he quotes other scriptures. And then he says, okay, on the one, so not only do other scriptures say that your rituals are temporary, but on the other hand, the scriptures declare that immortality, the real immortality, not just some lengthy stay in the celestial realm that you get from your rituals, But real immortality can be attained only through the knowledge of Brahman. You can't just make a statement like that. You have to quote scripture. Remember, these are exegetes. Vedanta is all about interpretation of scripture. Now, when they want to debate the Buddhists, they'll use reason and argument. They'll use a different mode of knowledge, inference. But when they're debating fellow Vedantins, those who accept the epistemology of scripture, they accept scripture. When you're talking to people who accept scripture, you don't need to quote inference because both you and your opponent are on common grounds. We both accept scripture. So now the rules of that engagement are going to be who is interpreting the scripture more accurately, who can bring in the more convincing quotes from scripture. Are you clear? Now, when you're debating someone who doesn't accept your scripture, then you can't quote your scripture. That person will say, I don't give it, who cares about your Upanishad? So then how are you going to debate? Well, then you use inference. That's a different thing, and we'll get to that later in the semester. But right now, the objector is a Mimamsaka who does accept scripture. Therefore, you can defeat him or engage him or try to refute him on the basis of quoting more convincing scriptures. Hope that's clear. Epistemology is how do you know something? And most Indian schools accept at least three, some accept 4, 5, 6, some 1, but at least 3, almost all of them do. And that is sense perception, inference, and then words, sacred text, or just words by authorities. So right now, the epistemology that is accepted by both participants in this exchange is the scripture, sacred words. So then he quotes other scriptures. The knower of Brahman attains the highest. Knowing him alone, one transcends death. Taittiriya, we can go and check it. What is stated by drinking soma we have become? So now he has to account for, well, what the Mimamsa quoted a verse about drinking soma we have become immortal. So how does Ramanuja going to deal with that? Well, he says that what was stated previously by the Mimamsaka as evidence, what drinking soma we have become immortal. Says Ramanuja, she shouldn't be taken literally, but in a relative sense only. It's like immortality from our point of view, because it's maybe thousands and thousands and thousands of celestial years. So it seems like forever. In fact, the gods are even called Amara or Amara, the deathless ones, but they're not really deathless. It's just rhetorical. So Brahman should be known. Okay, so that's the first thing. Right, moving on. So now a further objection is raised by the one school of Mimamsaka. There's two schools, main schools of Mimamsaka by Ramanuja's time. There was the Prabhakara and the Bhatta. There was Bhatta. What was it? Anyway, there were two schools. One was Bhatta something or other. Kumarila. And the other is Prabhakara. I think they were kind of contemporaries. One was slightly older than the other. So I don't know how much time we have. So the Mimamsakas want to say that the whole point of the Vedas is to prescribe, prescriptive. You must do this, you must do that. It's particularly to prescribe ritual and how to behave dharmically so as to sustain a society that revolves around the performance of ritual. The performance of ritual is the main central feature of a society. And then you have a social structure to support that. So you need kings to protect that whole society. You need merchants to generate wealth, to be some of which is, to perform rituals. So they're costly, and you sacrifice many things. And also to feed people. Then you need merchants, and then you need brahmanas to perform the ritual. So the entire reason for Vedic culture is ultimately for the Mimamsakas, the opponent, the ritualists, the purpose of life is to maintain the ritual. Remember, for Vedanta, the whole purpose is to inquire into Brahman and pursue Brahman. So very different goals. So now they want to say, well, so then if the argument, so the Mimamsakas have to say that, why do we do these rituals? Because the Vedas say so. Why do we follow the Vedas? Because they're eternal. Why is that important? Because if they were not eternal, if they were written by people, they could be imperfect. Then why should I believe, some Brahmana wrote the Vedas? Why should I believe him? Some Brahmana 1,000 years ago. So they can't say some Brahmana wrote it or some human wrote it. It's Purushaya, written by a human. So they say they're Apurushaya. They're not written by anybody. They're eternal. Therefore, they're perfect. They exist in harmony with the existence of the universe. They don't even accept cyclical creation, as most other Hindus and even Buddhists do. They don't even want to say it's cyclical, that there's creation and then there's dissolution and there's a period of latency and then creation starts again. So like Big Bang, right? Evolution and devolution, and then there's another Big Bang. That's actually a theory that some physicists floated in the past. That they called it the bouncing universe. I forget, sort of on the margins, but it had its moment, and these things can make their comeback. Mimamsas don't even want to accept that. They want it to be eternal. Not even that it dissolves. Where is it going to dissolve into? So therefore, they say the power of a word. So they're very into linguistics. If the Vedas are eternal and the Vedas are made of words, right, injunctions, do this, don't do that, perform the ritual, drink the soma, well, then those words must be eternal. So languages must be eternal. So they get into very analytical, and they engage language very analytically. And so they came up with very powerful insights that, when Europeans looked at sort of harmony and grammar and some of the analysis of linguistic theory of ancient India was actually triggered the whole development of historical linguistics in Europe. So there was a very insightful and profound analysis of the nature of language because it's eternal. But anyway, so the power of a word to signify a thing, right? I say book, and it has the power to signify this. Somehow there's a Shakti with that word. If I say book, even if you're not looking at my book, an image comes to your mind of a book. So there's a power, you think of it that way. The power of a word to signify a thing is known only from the use, that's the important term. It is put to by experienced people. You don't know what a book is. You may have an image of it, but to really understand it, you have to know what use it is. Well, it has to be associated with an action, like reading and conveying knowledge. That's the Mimamsa wants to say. Can't just be descriptive. Can't just say, well, a book is something with an orange cover and white sheets inside. It doesn't really it doesn't help you understand what it really is. You have to associate it with action, like reading or cup, drinking. That's the Mimamsa view. The true purport of a word is to donate an action. It cannot produce knowledge of a mere existing thing, something just existing, and I just say, oh, it's a stone. Well, that doesn't help. Well, what does a stone do? You have to. For them, it has to be associated with an action. Well, that stone can be used for building, it can be used in construction, and so on and so forth. So they want to say the import of the Vedas is only action, not some description of Brahman. Okay, this Mimamsa is attacking the idea that the Upanishads are to know Brahman, no action involved with that, just knowledge. So they say, we can't understand a thing just by, if it just exists and it's not connected with an action. That's their argument. Therefore, the import of the Veda is only action, by which they mean rituals. And as such, the Vedanta texts, what the Vedanta texts, meaning the Upanishads, remember the Mimamsakas, the ritualists, they're interested in the older texts, the Vedas, the Brahmanas that we've made a couple of references to, which are prose texts that tell you how to do a ritual. Do this, do that, sit here. Recite this hymn at this time. This Brahmana sits here. The Hotri sits there. The Yajamana priest sits over here. And the 4 different priests: Yajamana, the Hotri, the Brahmana, and so forth. Forget the other one. When do you chant this Veda? When do you chant that one? So it's all action. So therefore, the import of the Veda is only action, and as such, the Vedanta text cannot be an authority with respect to Brahman, which, being an already existing thing, established thing, it has no connection with action. It is not connected with action. You only can know it. There's no action involved with it. Hence, an inquiry into Brahman need not be taken up. Remember, the Vedanta first verse is, now there's a desire to know Brahman. And the opponent says, it's useless. What's the point of it? You can't know it because it's not associated with an action. That's the argument. It cannot produce the result expected of it. You're wasting your time inquiring into Brahman. It's just an already existing thing. It's not associated with action. You can never know it. You can only know a thing through the action that that thing provokes or triggers or is associated with. So Ramanuja, I think we should skip this. I'm not sure if this is very interesting to you. Hang in. I have to give you the answer now. So if you're finding this a bit boring, just hang in there, and we'll get to the next verse. You might find that a little bit more. But it's important for you to understand, to get a sense of what Vedanta is, my friends. We're on the very, very first verse, so we should at least read the very first verse and the commentary. So what's the answer? People who are guided. But first of all, he says, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Anyone who knows language doesn't say such a foolish thing as you just said. That's basically what he's saying, but he's saying it slightly more politely. Let's see how he says it. It's not an argument. It's just like, people who know language don't talk such foolishness. People who are guided by the accepted criteria of truth cannot respect an opinion which sets aside the universally known method of establishing the relation between words and the things signified by them. Right? Anybody who knows it, how do we know the meaning of words? There's a universally accepted means of establishing the relationship between a thing and the word that's used to denote that thing, between the book as an object and the word book, which denotes it. People who know language they understand this. The universal relationship is going to go on to say, and it doesn't have to do anything with action. That's going to be his argument. Keep that in mind. He has to argue against the idea that meaning can only be understood through action. So if you assign meaning to an object, you can only really understand that object when you get a better sense of kind of action it triggers or produces or is associated with. He's going to argue against that. And he starts off just saying this dismissive thing. Annoyed by this. So let's jump down. So he goes on like this. Parents point out to their child the things that are signified by the words they use. They just say, this is a book. They don't associate it with action. They say, book. Where's the action in that? So parents point out to their child the things that are signified by the words they use. And in this way, thus the child comes to know that these words means those things, just by parents pointing to it. Computer, right? Plug. What's the action there? It finds in time that these words of themselves gives rise to a certain ideas, not because they're associated with action. In time, the child hears it, develops an idea, and slowly the idea of its place in the universe of things grows. Book. What is a book? Starts off with just pointing. And as it finds no other relation between these words and the object signified by them, the child realizes that whenever the term book is used, it's always for that object and there's no other relations. So just by that constant relationship, it comes to understand that the relation between them is based on the denotative power of the words, not action. The words denote, they describe, they point to. Remember, he's going to say, we don't have to bring action into it. Maybe you can in some instances, but just the child understands the word denotes, has a power to denote the object. Therefore, the rule, which the Mimamsa is trying to argue, the rule that words denote only action is not binding. Well, that doesn't bind us, that rule. It's not, it may have sometimes be the case, but it's not binding in all instances. That's his argument. Okay, I know we're drifting a bit away from Ishvara, but remember, first sutra is, now we inquire into Brahman. Brahman is Ishvara. So this is related. And I think it's important for you to get a sense of, he's arguing against intellectual opponents of his time, day and age. And just get a glimpse of that, my friends. 12th century. Vedanta, it's now, there are Vedantins dealing with the quantum problem in physics. There are Indians that are using Vedantic perspectives, and they're engaging with our modern moment. We're just trying to get a sense of how that was in the past, and from that we get a sense of how it continues to be like that. In other words, Vedantins have continued to engage their intellectual environment. So bear with us. Maybe you think this is great. I hope you do. I'm just projecting. I don't want you to be bored. So let's keep going. Okay. So therefore, the rule that words denote only action is not binding. And we find that it is possible for words to convey knowledge of a self-established existing thing. a thing existing in its own right, self-established. A stone is a stone. We don't have to associate it with any action. That's bringing in something from the outside. It's self-existent. And we just point to it. The parent points to it, stone, 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 stone. And in time, that denotes meaning in the mind of a child. That's his first point. So the Vedanta text, right? He has to establish the Vedanta text are authoritative. This is a relationship to our course, this part of the course. The Upanishads speak about Brahman, whether that's personal or impersonal, that's a secondary issue. And he has to first of all defend why are the Vedanta texts an authority? Why should we accept them? That they speak about Brahman, God, Ishvara, intelligence. So you have to start off, the first thing he has to do is engage the first argument. Fellow scripturalists, like him, they also accept scripture. Later in the course, we'll look at their arguments against using logic against those that don't accept scripture. But the first thing is that those closest to home accept the same text. We've got to deal with that first. And the first argument is Upanishads don't really, they describe Brahman. It's Sat, it exists, it's Chit, it's blissful. That's descriptive, not connected with action. We read the verse, right? 10 to the power, whatever it was, 20. That's the sort of quantitatively, the quantitative amount of bliss present in Brahman compared to a king who owns the whole world and that's perfect health and beauty. It's descriptive, not prescriptive, doesn't prescribe us. That's his first argument, is words can. So the Vedanta texts are authority with respect to Brahman, even though it is a self-established existing thing, and therefore an inquiry into Brahman should be taken up. He has to defend the first sutra. First sutra is we should inquire into Brahman if we want to seek our ultimate well-being, our ultimate good, the ultimate purpose of life. We have to inquire into Brahman. Right off the bat, the challenger says, it's useless, your inquiry. It's useless because you can't know Brahman. Why can't you know Brahman? Because it's not associated with any action, and you can only know things through action. So that's why he's taking it, he has to defend. And then he goes on to the second argument. Even if, so this is what you do. First of all, you reject the opponent's position. And then you say, even if we accept your position, you are still going to run into problems, you, the opponents, even if we accept it. So it's hypothetical. Let's hypothetically accept your point of view. This is very common in Indian. It shows you how intellectually alive and sharp that, okay, we reject your point of view, fair enough, and these are the reasons why, fine. But then to actually go and accept the opponent's point of view and then show how it's incoherent, that takes a deeper sort of level of analytical prowess. Even if the Vedanta texts relate only to things to be accomplished, even if we accept your view that meaning can only be attained through action, still an inquiry, even on those premises, an inquiry into Brahman should be taken up. Why? Because the scriptures do prescribe meditation. That's an action. So the scriptures, in fact, do. You say that the scriptures only describe Brahman, but actually they also prescribe actions as well. What action? They prescribe meditation on Brahman. And then he quotes the text. You have to quote the text. You can't just say the scriptures say this and that. You quote them. So here we are. Brah means Brihad 2, 4, 5. Verily, my dear, the self has to be seen, has to be heard, reflected on, and meditated on. Very important verse. So those are actions: seeing, hearing. So that's one verse. And then you quote 2 or 3, and then you say, okay, look, not just one, because one is good, but 2 or 3 there, you've really made your case. So then it has to be sought after. We must try to understand it. Those are actions. Chandogya, 8. And then back to, and again, Brihad 4 says the same thing. An action like meditation, it is an action. You're fixing the mind, controlling the mind, that's action. Why is that not action? You're using willpower to focus the mind on, let's say, Om. That's an action. And then the action of, and it's only by action that you keep the mind still. Try to fix your mind on something. You may say that's inaction. Well, it is, but it takes an action to keep the mind inactive. It sounds like an oxymoron, but no. The mind wants to wander, then something brings it back. What is it? That action. It's the higher mind, so to speak. We'll look at that when we get to yoga. These are all actions. So an action like meditation, which is enjoined, in the scriptures, should have a result of a particular nature and quality. All right, let's move on. Okay, hopefully you get a sense of that. So that's the first sutra. I'm sorry that it wasn't included here. I'll have to, next time I teach this course, what I'll do is just paste it up on top. But it's on page 1 and we're on page 83 for the reasons I explained. He uses 80 pages just to refute Shankara. He really had to get it out of his system. All right, the idea that, well, he loves Ishvara, he loves God. And for someone to come along and say your God is illusory, well, good luck with that. You know, someone that's a lover of God, a bhakta, a devotee, has to respond to that. It's going to come after you, guns blazing. 80 pages. Definition of Brahman. That's topic 2 and sutra 2. Yeah, 2. So there are topics. Sometimes it's not necessarily the same. A topic may be 2 or 3 sutras. So the topic number doesn't necessarily coincide with the sutra number because there may be more than one sutra in a topic. So we're definitely going to have to spend another class on this, my friends, and I hope you're okay with that. So what's the definition of Brahman? First sutra is that we're going to take up atato brahma jignasa. Now there is going to be an inquiry. There's the desire to inquire into Brahman. Fine. Now we know what this sutra is about. It's not going to be about yoga. It's not going to be about anything else. It's not going to be about medicine. Not going to be about astronomy. What's going to be about? It's going to an inquiry into Brahman. Fine. The next thing this is systematic exposition. What is this Brahman? Definition. Brahman is that omniscient, omnipotent, all-merciful being. Okay, so now we see where God is connected to all this. And that's our course. So Brahman is that omniscient, omnipotent, all-merciful being. Any theistic tradition of the world will use those terms: Christianity, Islam, Judaism. From whom proceeds the origin, sustenance, and dissolution of this varied and wonderfully fashioned world. So this is intelligent design. That there must be an omnipotent, omniscient being behind the wonders of this world. It cannot just be the random and accidental collision of subatomic particles governed and by mysterious forces that we call gravity and nuclear and so forth forces. There must be intelligence. So first of all, he introduces, Ramanuja introduces the topic. What is the nature of that Brahman which is to be inquired into? If we want to inquire into something, it must have a nature. So what is the nature of that Brahman which is to be inquired into? And then he gives the answer. This is the sutra. That Brahman, how do we know it? Well, we know it from these things, from which these beings are born, by which they live, and by which they live after birth, and into which they enter at death. Try to know that is Brahman. Here he's quoting my friends, Taittiriya Upanishads that we read. So now he quotes, what is the nature of Brahman? How can we know it? It's beyond matter. We can't see it with our eyes, and our minds can only conceive of material things, cause and effects, from perceived things. Make inferences from perceived things, deductions, inductions. It's all starts off with perceived things, and then we make inferences from that. And then that becomes knowledge that we hand down through words. So the 3 forms of knowledge: perception, inference, words, they're all based on perception. Science would agree, philosophy would agree. So what is the nature of it? So he quotes the Taittiriya. This is the verse. So it is the nature of that Brahman which is to be inquired, that from which these beings are born, these beings, you and me, the trees, the bugs, the rabbits, by which they live after birth. We all sustain ourselves in this world of matter, and into which they enter at death. Our bodies go back to dust thou art, to dust thou shalt return. That is Brahman. This text, right, from the Taittiriya Upanishads, always going to be quoting the Upanishads. Give you the first 3 letters and you can guess the rest. You've read them all, or read the main ones, bits of them anyway. This text gives a definition of Brahman. That is to say, i.e., it gives those peculiar characteristics. To know something, it has to have a peculiar characteristic. It has to be different from something else. If I'm going to say this is a book, I have to describe it in ways that its properties and qualities, which are different from the properties and qualities of the plug. Because if they're the self, if I give you the same description, then how would you know the difference? So they have to be peculiar, the way he's putting it, the peculiar characteristics, specific characteristics, right? This is gray, it channels electricity, it's on a cord, plug my thing into it. This is, although it may have similar ones, they're both orange. The book is orange and the cord is orange. So there may be some similar characteristics, but there has to be some peculiar ones. Peculiar, he doesn't mean peculiar odd, he means distinctive. He gives those distinctive characteristics by which Brahman is distinguished from other things. How is Brahman, how is God distinguished from everything? Well, God is the creator and the origin, and everything emanates from him, from God, and everything Brahman, right? We're using the term Brahman. Everything emanates from Brahman and returns to, it's sustained as long as we live, we're sustained by Brahman, and at death we go back into Brahman, right? Here's your objection. Start off with the objection. Keeps you on your toes, not just dogmatic, this is this and that is that, this is this, with no critical feedback, no intellectual engagement, no dialogue. No, Vedanta is not like that. We welcome all challenges. If you believe you have truth, what are you afraid of? Why would you close yourself in a little box and say, well, and demonize other things and say, oh, that's atheism, we don't want to hear it. No, all those are demons. No. Oh, these guys are, no, not like that. You say, okay, what do you got to say? Bring it along. And you yourself bring it into your own commentary. You invite it. How intellectually open-hearted and open-minded and intellectually vibrant is that? So you're always going to have your objection, purvapaksha. Okay, these characteristics, which ones? He reminds us. The origin, that's from the verse itself, the sutra. The origin, etc., right? Three things. Origin, remember this, janmadi asya yataha. The origin, janma, there's different terms, the maintenance and the dissolution. These three things, the objector says, the origin, maintenance of the universe cannot define Brahman, he says, right? The objector is always going to object to whatever the verse says, the objector is going to object to it. And now you have to justify the verse. That's what the commentator does, is to defend the verse. If you're a Vedantin, you're defending the Vedanta Sutra. You're defending its coherence and its intellectual value. So how are you going to defend this argument? What's the argument first? These cannot define Brahman. Why not? For the attributes being more than one, Brahman is the origin, number one. The maintainer, the sustenance, number two, and the dissolution as three qualities, being more than one, there arises the possibility of their denoting more than one Brahman. Maybe, okay, fine. Maybe there's three Brahmans then. One of them is the origin, one of them is the maintenance, and one is the dissolution. The fact that these three characters, you, the Vedantin, the sutra is saying the Brahman is known for three characteristics. Well, the objector says, well, what if these three characteristics that you say allow us to know Brahman, what if they are actually characteristics of three different things? And he says, just as when we say the ox is that which is broken horned, it has three properties. One is broken horned, one is hornless, and one is fully horned. They're three different things. You can't be the same ox. The same ox can't have a broken horn and at the same time be hornless and at the same time be fully horned. Those are three different oxes. So these three characteristics maybe might tell us that there's a Brahman, but it doesn't tell us there's one Brahman. What if there's three? So there's more oxen than one are meant. Again, these attributes, the origin, etc., from the sutra, origin, maintenance, and dissolution, they cannot be accidental characteristics of Brahman. An accidental characteristic is something which is not inherent. So the inherent nature of the sun is its luminosity and heat. But it's the fact that it burns a haystack when it's too hot, or it burns, the California fire, that's not inherent in the sun. It's an accidental quality. It's a quality of the sun. The sun does cause fires, but that's not inherent to it. It's accidental, and it happens, but it's not an inherent quality. You see the difference? So okay. So for example, he gives an example. Now we didn't finish. Against these attributes, the origin, etc., cannot be accidental characteristics of Brahman. For such characteristics denote it in a different form denote in a different form a thing already known from a certain source. As for example, the house where there is that crane belongs to Devadatta. So you've got a house and the crane is sitting on the roof. And that's Devadatta. Devadatta is like Joe, what is it? Joe, just a name for a generic person. In Sanskrit, you say Devadatta. What do you say in American? Jane Doe or something, I don't know. In English, in England, we might say, Fred Smith or, something like that. Joe Bloggs. So the house of Devadatta, that house which has the crane sitting on it, but it's an accident that the crane's sitting on it. You have to already know that it's Devadatta's house for it then to be meaningful that, oh, by the way, which one is Devadatta's house? Is the one with the crane on it. If you didn't already know that was Devadatta's house, the fact that the crane's sitting on it's not going to give you the knowledge that it's Devadatta's house. You have to already know that from other source of knowledge. Maybe you're his friend, maybe you visited him. So first you know it's Devadatta's house, but then there's this accidental quality. It's accidentally the crane happens to sit on it, and then you can just use that accidental quality, the crane sitting on it, to say, oh, that's Devadatta's house, the one with the crane. So an accidental quality does not give you. You have to already know it's Devadatta. So the fact that it's that the Brahman is that which gives produces creation, maintenance, and dissolution. These accidental qualities, you have to already know that there's Brahman. For those accidental qualities to then denote Brahman. I hope you follow that. You have to already know it's Devadatta's house. For the accidental quality that the crane happens to accidentally be sitting on it, for that to then denote Devadatta's house, you have to already know it's Devadatta's house. So likewise with Brahman. Okay, that's the argument. And why is he going into all of this? Because he wants to say, therefore, he wants to reject he's attacking the sutra. He's attacking your scripture. Vedantic. You got to defend your scripture. You got to defend it. That's what a theologian does. That's your dharma. So therefore, Brahman cannot be defined at all because it has no accidental qualities. You have to already know it and it can't be known. So therefore, right, can't be known. You can't see it, can't hear it. So therefore, Brahman can't be defined at all. And if it can't be defined at all, an inquiry into it is useless. Back to the first verse, first sutra. Now there's an inquiry into Brahman. The opponent says, useless, wasting your time, can't be known. And even if you say some accidental quality, like, okay, right, it produces creation because Brahman is different from the creation and the maintenance and dissolution. These are accidental qualities, not inherent in Brahman. The scriptures say Brahman is Satchidananda. That's its inherent nature. It is, it's conscious, it's blissful. Creation is secondary to that, it's accidental. Brahman could exist without creation, just like the house can exist without a crane sitting on it. So therefore, it's useless inquiring into it, can't be known. Your accidental qualities like creation don't help us. Answer. Oh, Ramanuja's got to answer this one. He says the origin can be indicative of Brahman as being its accidental characteristics. He accepts that these are accidental characteristics. Remember, accidental means not inherent, not part of it. Inherent means you can't separate it. You can't separate heat and light from the sun, and it wouldn't be a sun. So the inherent essence of the sun is heat and light. Now, the fact that it burns, it's an accident. You can imagine a world where the sun then never burns anything because it's not so hot, and maybe we're not devastating our environment and destroying our planet like we are. Yeah, right. So you could imagine a world where that. So it's not essential to the sun to burn something. It might be the case that it burns things, but you could have a sun that doesn't burn anything. Right? There's a sun, some of the colder planets, we go out in the solar system, they still get some light from the sun. The sun is still there, they're still revolving around the sun, but it doesn't burn anything. So right there we have an example. So therefore, burning is not an essential quality of the sun. So he's going to say the same thing about Brahman. So the origin, etc., can be indicative, this is of Ramanuja, the answer to the opponent, can be indicative of Brahman as being its accidental characteristics, inasmuch as Brahman is already known in another form. So he's going to say, Devadatta's house is already, we already know it's Devadatta, and then to say that the crane is sitting on it is useful. Because we already know it's Devadatta, and then we can say, well, but which one is Devadatta's house? We already know that it's Devadatta's house, but you want to tell your friend who does the one with the crane on. We already know it. So he's going to say, we do already know Brahman. and we already know it, and therefore pointing to its accidental characteristics is useful and meaningful. And therefore an inquiry into it, Sutra 111, is useful. So the origin can be indicative of Brahman as being its accidental characteristics, inasmuch as Brahman is already known. How so? In another form or aspect. How? Which one is that? From the etymological meaning of the word, the very meaning of the word Brahman, brah, from brah in Sanskrit is that which brah produces greatness, which expands. The very word tells us. So we do know it from the very word that we use to denote it. It is known separate from its accidental qualities. And therefore these accidental qualities, just like the crane, can be useful in pointing to Brahman when we're describing it to someone else, teaching it to someone else, which is what the Upanishads and Vedanta are trying to do to us. They want to teach us about Brahman because they want to urge us to seek Brahman, because they don't want us to suffer ultimately, my friends, because we suffer, because we're embodied, because we're frustrated, because we're always in anxiety, we're always depressed. Oh, some of us, or at least depressed some of the time. So they want us to be happy, but that's a story for another day. So how do we know it? It's already known in another form or aspect from the etymological meaning. What does the word mean? It's etymology. What does it mean? Possessing supreme greatness and power of growth. So brah means to grow and expand. Moreover, the Taittiriya, which we've read, Upanishad. So notice how often they quote the Upanishads. That's their job. The Taittiriya text refers to some being already well known. Apart from creation and maintenance, already well known. In the Taittiriya, for example, whose greatness, what's his greatness, is due to being both the material and the efficient cause of the universe. Both the material, the stuff from which the material is made, and the efficient cause, that which makes things out of that material cause. So, okay, so let's say when you make a pot, what's the material cause of the pot? Is clay. That's the matter from which the clay is. The pot is made. But the lump of clay is not just going to magically become a pot. It needs an efficient cause. It needs a potter, a stick, a spinning wheel, a potter's wheel. Those are the efficient causes. Instrumental causes, actually, the step. But let's not get into that. So the Taittiriya text refers to some being already well known, whose greatness is due to its being both the material and the efficient cause of the world. And he quotes the Chandogya. This Brahman, which is known to be all this, can be, and therefore the conclusion, he says, so therefore, because we already know it from the etymology, from the sacred texts, then we can add these accidental characteristics. So then now, since we already know something about it, like Devadatta, we already know it's his house, now we can say, that crane, the house of which the crane's sitting on, now it's useful, we can meaningfully point people to Devadatta's house because we already know that's Devadatta. So we already know about Brahman from its etymology, from these other descriptions. So then it's useful to say that the origin of the universe as its accidental traits, becomes useful. All this can be indicated by the origin of the universe as its accidental traits, and therefore a knowledge of Brahman through these characters is possible. The opponent saying, wasting your time, useless. Your inquiry into Brahman, Sutra 111, useless, can't be known. He makes his defense and says, therefore it can be known. So we have defended our sutra. And then he says, and what about this other argument that three characteristics, how do we know they denote one thing? The opponent says, if you say that, broken horned, hornless, fully horned, clearly that's not one ox. So it's a silly argument. He's introduced a silly argument. I don't know if this is a real opponent or he's just making this up. Usually it's a real opponent. We have to assume real arguments really out there. I mean, these they have integrity. There's no reason to say they're making up silly arguments just to defeat them easily. That would be very superficial of us to say that. We have to assume that these are real arguments out there, but it's obviously not a very good one, and easily to dispose of this idea that these three characteristics, how do we know they don't denote three different things? And it's obvious, right? Broken horned, hornless, fully horned can't be the same thing. So what does Ramanuja says? Again, the origin can define Brahman. The objection that more than one attribute, this objection over here, would give rise to the idea of more than one Brahman is not correct. It is only when the attributes are contradictory to each other that they can give rise to such an idea, as in the example cited by the objector. What is they're contradictory. You can't be broken horned and hornless and fully horned. So in that case, yes, then there must be 3 oxen, one which is broken horned, one which is hornless, and one which is fully horned. But what if they don't contradict? Like the ox which has a horn, that the ox which has a black horn, and the ox which has a black horn which is bent. That doesn't contradict. Could be the same one. The same ox which has a horn, that same ox could have a black horn, and that same ox could have a black horn. That's curved. It's not contradictory. That's his argument. It's only when the attributes are contradictory to each other that they give rise to such an idea, as in the example cited by the objector with these hornless business. But when they do not contradict each other, and now he gives his example, the tall, fair-looking youth is Devadatta. Notice Devadatta here. He's like Jane Doe. I think that's what generic, right? If you say Devadatta is tall, okay, and Devadatta is fair-looking, okay, and Devadatta is youthful, okay, that doesn't necessarily mean there's 3 Devadattas, because the same Devadatta could be tall, fair-looking, and youthful. So then Brahman can be the origin and the sustainer and the dissolver of the universe. They're not contradictory, because origin is different from maintenance, is different from dissolution. Where's the contradiction? Here we do not get the idea of more than one person with Devadatta. Similarly, as the origin, etc. of the universe are attributes that are not contradictory, having reference to different times, because if you create, you're doing that at a different time. The maintenance comes after creation, and then dissolution is after both of those. So if something could be in 3 different phases at 3 different times, that doesn't contradict. That doesn't require that Brahman be 3 different things. It manifests the universe in 3 different phases. They don't contradict. So therefore, they're not contradictory, having reference to different times. They denote only one Brahman, and it can be known through that. So it comes back to, what's the conclusion? Yes, we can know Brahman through its effects. What's the effect? Is its universe. And what is the universe from an Indian point of view, Vedanta point of view? It's that with the creation, which must have an origin, which must be maintained, and which eventually dissolves back into its source, only to then, at a later point, the whole cycle begins again. Cyclical universes, my friends. There are physicists that proposed that back in the 70s, very recently, and it's still an idea that periodically has its supporters, maybe not mainstream, but it has its supporters. Go on Google. Cyclical universe. Maybe they call it bouncing universe. They may have different names. So this is why I'm hoping some of you that are trained in our modern intellectual systems, my friends, this is what my secret hope for you all, for some of you. Whatever your fields are, that you bring some of these, maybe not all of them, you may not relate to all of the teachings of the ancient text, but some of them that you find that strike you, that you find worthy. Bring them into conversation with our modern traditions. Now, I'm grounded in the tradition. I don't know very much about science, so I'm too old to do that now. Some of you are coming from the other side, coming out of the modern fields of science. I hope this course will open up a door to these different viewpoints, and then you know, this is how knowledge systems spread. People bring them into conversation with their existing environments. So I think that can't be done. In philosophy of religion, more and more, they're realizing they have to bring in non-Western viewpoints, non-European viewpoints. So this is the very time, the next 50 years, is, you know, it started even when I first started off in academia, when, 30, 40 years ago. But now more and more departments are scrambling to find non-Western representations. It's a perfect time to be in the humanities and bringing in non-Western viewpoints. And slowly that will then start to be brought into science and so forth. Science is still a bit, very rigorously, it has its lineage of, whatever, Aristotle and then Newton and all the big players, Francis Bacon and Hume and, all the sort of voices of our Western scientific genealogy. but that's going to take a bit longer before Eastern views penetrates that. But it's certainly happening in humanity. It still takes time, and it takes people to bring those voices into their respective fields, my friends. I hope some of you will do that to whatever extent. At whatever extent you feel you find these general teachings, Buddhism, Jainism, and there's a wide variety of them. But somewhere in there you find something meaningful, you bring it to the table. And he finishes. So the objection that Brahman cannot be defined, and consequently that no inquiry into Brahman is possible, is not correct. So he ends up by rejecting that Purva-paksha. Remember, Purva-paksha, objection. Gosh, I hope you are okay with all of that. And I really do. And I hope at least you find it intriguing. And, you know, maybe it's brand new for you, you may find it challenging. I was very repetitive. I know the Upanishads are repetitive, but I have to sort of. Some of you may find, okay, we said that 10 times already, but you know, if it's brand new for some of you, it helps. I know when I study things I'm not familiar with, like science and even Western philosophy, I really appreciate hearing it again and again and again, especially at my age. Memory is not what it was in the first place. Okay, so that's it for today, and we're going to continue with this. So even though I've only got one session for this, we can take two, and then we'll start reading Shankara, the Advaitin, non-dualism. But we'll read Shankara's refutation of other schools. Right now, there's a refutation of Vedic schools, the ones that accept the same script as you do. Then chapter 2 of the Vedanta Sutra is other schools. Now you can quote scripture with some of them, but not all of them. Okay, so we meet again on whenever I do the second lecture. Do let me know if you find this very difficult. Just drop me an email or something. Like, you know, staring at a screen. In a classroom, at least you can look at the faces, and if you see everyone's falling asleep, you know, okay, skip this verse. But you can't do that when you're with an asynchronous course. So if you feel strongly either way, just drop in an email if you want to. Okay, have